You know, when your laptop starts freezing up or an app keeps crashing, you don't really panic.
No, I mean, you just assume there's a glitch in the code somewhere.
Exactly. You figure, well, eventually a software engineer is going to push out a patch, you'll download it, and everything will just, run smoothly again. It's a very clean, very modern comfort. But, and this is a big but, what if we applied that exact same logic to the human body?
Oh, man. That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right. Like, what if we could literally rewrite human biology exactly the same way a software engineer patches a glitch in a computer program?
It completely reframes how we think about health.
Huh.
I mean, it changes biology from something we merely observe and treat into something we can fundamentally engineer.
Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this rapidly advancing and honestly kind of mind-bending frontier of what's being called programmable biology.
Which is a heavy term.
It really is. And we have a fascinating stack of sources to guide us today. We're looking at official corporate materials from pharmaceutical giants Moderna and Pfizer, a really wild presentation on surgical nanorobotics by scientist Ido Bachelet, a 2022 White House executive order on the bioeconomy, and a highly critical thread from the video platform Rumble.
Yeah, we are definitely covering the whole spectrum today.
We have to, because we're going to look at this from every single angle. We'll explore the utopian promises of this technology, the cures, the precision, but we're also going to look closely at the intense public pushback it's receiving. We want to understand the facts, but also the visceral reaction people are having to it.
Which is absolutely necessary. A shift this profound doesn't just happen in a vacuum in some laboratory. It happens in society, and it challenges, like, our most deeply held assumptions about our own bodies.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start at the foundational level of this shift, which is the chemical code itself, specifically the mRNA revolution.
Right, the pandemic really brought this into the mainstream.
It did. But if you look at the corporate architecture and public statements from companies like Moderna and Pfizer now, the language they use is just wild. Moderna explicitly states their strategy is to treat their mRNA platform like a computer's operating system.
Yeah, they actually call their mRNA medicines the software of life.
Which is such a bold claim.
It is, but it's a brilliant way to conceptualize it. I mean, it's fundamentally different from the past century of medicine. In traditional drug development, every new drug is a completely bespoke creation.
Like starting from scratch every time.
Exactly. You have to figure out the chemistry, the delivery mechanism, the safety profile, the manufacturing, all of it from scratch. It takes years, sometimes decades. Moderna's approach flips that entire paradigm on its head.
Because they treat the delivery system as fixed hardware, right?
Precisely. They designed a system where the base components, like the lipid nanoparticle delivery system, the underlying structure of the molecule, they remain basically identical across all their different treatments.
So the only thing they're swapping out is the specific sequence of genetic code.
Right.
They actually call that sequence the AP, the specific coding region that directs the cell to produce a certain protein. It's basically plug and play. And Pfizer is following the exact same playbook.
They're expanding way beyond infectious diseases.
Yeah, in their corporate materials, they detail how they're developing rapid response flu shots that can be literally edited mid-season if a new strain emerges. They have a new shingles vaccine in the works. But the part that really caught my eye is their collaboration with a company called Beam Therapeutics.
Oh, the gene editing work.
Yes, they are working on actual gene editing for rare diseases.
And that is where the software analogy becomes incredibly literal. With companies like Beam, they're using these lipid nanoparticles to deliver microscopic tools and a guide RNA to physically fix single gene mutations.
Like a biological find and replace.
Exactly. Think about conditions like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia. You're delivering temporary instructions to a cell to create a tiny molecular machine that permanently fixes a broken line of your own genetic code.
I love the ambition there, I really do. But I have to push back on the mechanics for a second. If we're treating mRNA like a software patch downloaded to the human body, well, a computer has an antivirus program to detect foreign code and delete it, right? The human body has an incredibly aggressive immune system. What stops our native antivirus from just shredding this genetic patch before it even boots up?
That was the profound biological challenge that held this whole field back for decades. I mean, if you just inject raw, naked mRNA into the bloodstream, enzymes in your blood would destroy it in seconds.
Wow, just instantly gone.
Basically. And even if it survived, the immune system would recognize it as foreign material like a virus and go into absolute overdrive, causing massive inflammation.
So how do you sneak the patch past the firewall?
Two ways. First, They wrap the fragile mRNA inside lipid nanoparticles. You can think of these as microscopic stealth envelopes made of fat.
Okay, fat envelopes.
Right. And because our own cell membranes are also made of lipids, these little fat bubbles can easily fuse with our cells and drop the mRNA payload safely inside. But the second part is even more ingenious.
Go on.
Once the mRNA is inside the cell, it has to be read by ribosomes. Ribosomes are kind of like the cell's 3D printers. They read genetic instructions and print proteins.
But wouldn't the ribosomes still recognize the instructions as foreign?
They would, unless you spoof the system. Scientists figured out how to physically modify the chemical letters of the synthetic mRNA.
Like changing the font.
Sort of. By swapping out one specific molecular building block for a slightly different one, they effectively camouflage the code. The ribosomes look at it and think, oh, this looks like normal mRNA produced naturally by the cell nucleus. I should read this. It bypasses the alarm system entirely.
That is wild. They are literally spoofing the cell's internal network to get the patch installed. But let me ask you about the gene editing part with Beam Therapeutics. If the goal is to permanently fix a broken gene, why use mRNA? Why not just inject the gene editing proteins directly into the body?
Well, it comes down to safety and precision. If you inject permanent gene editing tools into a body, they might make the intended cut, but what happens next?
They just hang around.
Yeah, they're still floating around. They might start making unintended cuts in healthy parts of your DNA. We call those off-target effects, and that can lead to cancer. The genius of using mRNA is its transient nature.
Meaning it doesn't stick around.
Right. It's like a self-destructing message. The mRNA instructs the cell to produce the gene editing tools just for a short burst of time.
Ah,
The tools are manufactured, they make the precise cut to fix the genome, and then the mRNA naturally degrades and disappears. The tools fade away. The transient nature of the software ensures you don't leave dangerous hardware running indefinitely inside the cell.
here's where it gets really interesting, though. If mRNA is just downloading the software, we have to talk about what happens when you start building physical machines to execute it.
Hardware side.
Yes, because this presentation from scientist Ido Bachelet on surgical nanorobotics feels like we are crossing a massive threshold. We are moving from chemical instructions to physical hardware patrolling the bloodstream.
What's fascinating here is that we are crossing from chemistry into actual molecular engineering. Bachelet's work revolves around a field called DNA origami.
Which sounds like a hobby you'd pick up at a craft store.
I know, right?
But we are talking about folding strands of DNA into physical 3D robots. Robots with an actual chassis, a hollow inside, and moving parts. And the scale he discusses in the source is just hard to fathom.
It's astronomical.
He is talking about putting billions of these robots into a single drop of saline. You could deploy them into a patient using a standard syringe without anesthesia, without a sterile operating room, for pennies on the dollar. But how do you actually fold DNA? It's just a double helix, right?
Well, DNA naturally wants to bind together. The chemical bases always pair up in a specific way. A pairs with T, C pairs with G. In DNA origami, scientists take a very long single strand of viral DNA, and then they synthesize hundreds of tiny short staple strands.
Like literal staples holding it together.
Exactly. When they mix them together and heat them up, those short staples bind to specific parts of the long strand, pulling it and folding it into precise three-dimensional shapes. You can fold it into a box, a tube, or in Bachelet's case, a microscopic clamshell.
And that clamshell is the robot.
Yes, the robot holds a payload inside it, maybe a highly toxic chemotherapy drug or a specific enzyme. In its closed state, the payload is concealed. It's completely harmless.
Just floating around.
Right. But when the robot encounters a specific molecular trigger, the clamshell opens, exposing the payload to the target. It's a binary off-to-on switch.
He outlines applications that sound straight out of science fiction. I mean, he describes using these robots as sub-millimeter scalpels. They can be programmed to find the exact interface between a solid tumor and healthy tissue, and then open up to expose an enzyme that literally severs the physical links between the cancer cells.
Causing the tumor to just disintegrate.
It's unbelievable. He even talks about suppressing pain.
That is one of the most fascinating examples.
Right. He says they can have these robots hover near nerve cells. The robots just wait for pain-signaling neurotransmitters to hit a certain threshold. Only then do they open up and expose a calcium channel blocker to shut the pain down.
It creates a system of responsive medicine. Think about how we treat severe pain today. We flood the entire central nervous system with opioids.
Which causes massive side effects and addiction.
Exactly. These nanorobots change that entirely. They only act locally, precisely where the pain is occurring, and only when a specific chemical threshold is met.
He uses this analogy of ants carrying prey much larger than themselves to help visualize this. He says these nanorobots can recognize specific cells, detach them from the tissue matrix, and literally carry them to the biological trash to be destroyed, or conversely, recruit new cells to an area to regrow damaged tissue.
The cellular logistics are incredible.
But okay, if you're listening to this right now and thinking, I am never letting a billion autonomous robots into my bloodstream, you are not alone. I have to ask the obvious pushback question. What stops them from going rogue? What if they just start attacking healthy tissue?
It's a crucial question. And the answer is that these aren't just dumb mechanical grabbers floating around blindly. Bachelet's team has designed these robots to mimic the interactions of an integrated computer processor. They utilize a concept called logic synthesis.
Wait, you are going to have to break that down for me. The source mentions half-adders and truth tables. You're losing me. How does a folded piece of DNA do math in your blood?
Okay, think of it less like doing long division and more like a highly secure bank vault.
Okay, I'm with you.
To open the vault, you need two separate bank managers to turn two separate keys at the exact same time. The nanorobot is the vault. The locks holding the clamshell shut are made of specialized DNA strands. Let's say you want to target a very specific type of leukemia. Lock number 1 will only open if it bumps into protein A, which is found on leukemia cells.
But protein A might also be found on healthy cells, right? That's the danger.
Exactly. So you design the robot with a logic gate, an AND gate. The robot has a second lock. Lock number 2 will only open if it bumps into protein B. The clamshell will only open and release the drug if protein A and protein B are present at the exact same time.
Oh, wow. So it requires multiple verification.
Right. You can even add a NOT gate. It will open if A and B are present, not C.
Because protein C might be a marker for a healthy heart cell.
Precisely. They are constantly sampling their environment, transferring bits of molecular information from robot to robot. They don't go rogue because their physical structure literally binds them to the laws of their programmed logic.
That is so elegant.
They physically cannot open unless the precise molecular address is met. They can even adapt autonomously if a tumor develops resistance and starts changing its surface proteins.
So what does this all mean? Because when you have software that can rewrite genes and physical nanobots computing logic gates in the bloodstream, you realize this stops being just a medical breakthrough. It is an industrial revolution.
It really is.
And it's the ultimate dual-use technology. Which brings us to why the United States government is suddenly treating programmable biology like a matter of national defense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that shift in perspective is incredibly apparent in the 2022 White House Executive Order on the American Bioeconomy.
A language in this official government document mirrors exactly what the pharmaceutical companies are saying. The government's explicit goal, written right there in the order, is to predictably program biology in the same way in which we write software and program computers.
They are taking the paradigm that Moderna and Bachelet are using for individual human bodies and applying it to the entire macroeconomy.
The scale of this initiative is staggering. And they aren't just talking about healthcare and pandemic readiness. The executive order explicitly expands the bioeconomy into climate change, energy, agriculture, and supply chain resilience.
Because if you can program biology, you can program organisms to do industrial work.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, for example, instead of pumping oil out of the ground to make plastics, you can program the genetic software of a yeast cell to consume agricultural waste and secrete industrial polymers.
That's amazing.
You can program microbes in the soil to pull nitrogen directly from the air, drastically reducing the need for chemical fertilizers. You can engineer algae to sequester massive amounts of carbon dioxide. The government realizes that the nations who master programmable biology will control the manufacturing pipelines of the 21st century.
To fuel that, the executive order mandates the creation of the data for the Bioeconomy Initiative. They want to harness multi-omic and genomic information on a massive scale. And for you listening, multi-omic data isn't just a cheek swab.
No, not at all.
It is the comprehensive, integrated map of your genomics, your proteins, your metabolic pathways, the entire biological data set of a population. But I mean, taking all this incredibly sensitive data and centralizing it to drive an industrial revolution, doesn't that create an unprecedented vulnerability?
It creates arguably the greatest security vulnerability of our time. The exact same technology that can engineer a drought-resistant wheat crop or a targeted cancer cure can, in theory, be used to engineer a highly transmissible novel pathogen.
Which is terrifying.
That is why the executive order places such a heavy emphasis on the Biosafety and Biosecurity Innovation Initiative.
They actually tasked the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI, with assessing threats from foreign adversaries trying to acquire U.S. biological data.
Because when biology becomes code, biological data becomes just as critical to protect as military defense software or the nuclear grid.
The stakes are that high.
Absolutely. If a foreign adversary manages to steal a nation's multiomic data, they hold the keys to that nation's bioeconomy. They could preempt critical biomanufacturing patents, disrupt biological supply chains, or in the worst-case scenario, develop targeted biological threats based on population data. The executive order is a loud public declaration that programmable biology is now a central pillar of geopolitical power.
Okay, take that massive, sweeping government data collection, combine it with pharmaceutical companies talking about hacking our bodies, and you get an inevitable collision with the public. It sparks a massive visceral reaction, which is why we need to look at how these exact same concepts are viewed through a radically different lens by the general public.
Science does not happen in a vacuum. If you don't understand the cultural friction points, it's just don't understand the reality of the technology.
Absolutely. Now, before we dive into this, I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener. We are about to discuss a highly critical, skeptical thread from the video platform Rumble. As always on this deep dive, we do not take sides. We are not endorsing the political viewpoints, the medical claims, or the conclusions made by the users in this thread. Our job is simply to impartially retort on the raw discourse contained in the source material so you can understand the broader cultural conversation.
It is essential to look at how the public is synthesizing this information.
It really is. In this Rumble thread posted by a user named NonVaxxer420, we see a fascinating compilation. The user literally links directly to Pfizer's quote about modifying the genome, Moderna's quote about hacking the software of life, and the White House executive order's goal of programming biology.
They're connecting all the dots from the official sources.
Yes, they tie all of these official sources together, but the framing is entirely different. The post is accompanied by tags like #ArrestBillGates, framing these biodigital technologies not as miraculous cures, but as an imminent, coordinated threat.
What's striking is that they are looking at the exact same public relations material the companies and the government are putting out, but they are interpreting the intent in the complete opposite direction.
There is a comment in the thread from a user named Legs2451 who identifies as a retired nurse. She writes that she stopped seeing doctors entirely, stating, "Healthcare is not healthcare at all. Anything they're putting in your body isn't about helping you, it's about enslaving you." My question to you is, why does the specific language used by science and the government like programming biology, hacking the software of life, trigger such a deep visceral fear in a significant portion of the public?
This raises an important question about the psychology of how we relate to technology. To a software engineer or molecular biologist, the phrase programmable biology is a beautiful utopian concept.
Right, it implies control over chaos.
Exactly. It means fixing a glitch that causes a child to be born with a fatal genetic disease like cystic fibrosis. It means removing the random, senseless cruelty of nature.
That makes perfect sense in theory, but to someone outside that laboratory.
To a skeptical public, programmable biology sounds like a dystopian loss of bodily autonomy. Because if a system can be programmed, it inherently implies there is a programmer.
Oh, that's a great point.
And if that programmer is a pharmaceutical corporation with a fiduciary duty to shareholders, or a government intelligence agency collecting genomic data, the narrative instantly shifts from healing to control.
That retired nurse's comment about enslavement perfectly captures that anxiety.
It does. When you use words like hacking and operating systems to describe the human body, you inadvertently invoke all the anxieties we already have about actual computers.
We know computers get viruses.
We know software tracks our data. We know tech monopolies surveil us and lock us into their ecosystems. When you tell the public their body is now a computer, they assume their body is now subject to surveillance, hacking, and loss of privacy. The framing of the technology is proving to be just as volatile as the technology itself.
It really is a double-edged sword. You package your medical breakthrough as software to make it sound modern, efficient, and scalable to your investors, but you end up terrifying the end user who feels like they're being treated like a piece of hardware on an assembly line.
Yeah, the messaging really backfired in that sense.
So to recap the massive journey we've taken today, we started at the chemical level, exploring how companies like Moderna and Pfizer are treating mRNA as plug-and-play software. We broke down the mechanics of how they use lipid nanoparticles to sneak past our immune systems and temporarily spoof our ribosomes to rewrite genetic code and cure diseases.
A total paradigm shift in medicine.
Then we zoomed in on the physical hardware, looking at Ido Bachelet's DNA origami, billions of nanorobots acting as microscopic surgeons, navigating complex logic gates in our blood to deliver targeted drugs and even turn off pain receptors.
From there, we scaled all the way up to the macroeconomic level, examining how the United States government is racing to secure massive amounts of biological data, aiming to turn programmable biology into a pillar of national defense, agricultural dominance, and climate strategy.
And finally, we looked at the very real grassroots skepticism pushing back against all of it, driven by a deep psychological fear over the loss of bodily autonomy when human life is reduced to hackable code. I want to emphasize to you listening, this isn't some futuristic sci-fi concept mapped out on a whiteboard for the year 2050. The bioeconomy is the current reality. It is actively shaping the healthcare you receive, the privacy of your most intimate data, and the global economic future.
The scientific tools are already built. The genetic operating system is live.
Which leaves us with one final thing to think about. We started this deep dive by comparing the human body to a computer with a glitch, waiting for a software engineer to patch the code. But if our biology becomes fully programmable software and our genetic data becomes a centralized national economic asset, who ultimately owns a copyright to your body?